I don't want to fuck anyone except a lolly. I just want to stick my penis in a lolly.
Lolicon. It's a form of media or discourse centered around the attraction to young or prepubescent girls. The term is generally used to refer to the sexual depiction of characters under the age of 16, more often in pornographic drawings and animations. Now, obviously, child pornography is a blatant form of child abuse, which is inherently wrong, disgustingly perverse, and thankfully, illegal in most places around the globe. But unlike child pornography, Lolicon is in somewhat of a gray area, as it doesn't involve real, living, breathing children, and as the Loliconnoisseurs say, it's just art, bro. And while it may be true that Lolicon does not involve real people, it is still a highly divisive subject, not to mention illegal in some countries, including the United States of America, wherein, under the PROTECT Act, any material that is a visual depiction of any kind, including a drawing, cartoon, sculpture, or painting that depicts a minor engaging in sexually explicit conduct and is obscene, is illegal and criminalized, as are any depictions that appear to be of a minor engaging in sexual intercourse, lacking serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. This does not make all simulated child pornography illegal, so if you can prove that your jailbait hentai isn't obscene and contains some form of serious value, then you got nothing to worry about. Though, I think it's fair to assume that more often than not, people aren't looking at simulated child pornography for pure and decent reasons. Now, allow me to take you on a journey back to a simpler time. It's 1973, and Marvin Miller, a Californian businessman specializing in pornographic films and books, sent out an advertisement for graphic, sexual material. Because of this, Miller ended up in a legal battle with the state of California, and was eventually found guilty of obscenity. Miller later appealed the ruling, arguing that the jury did not use the previously set standard, stating that in order to be judged obscene, materials must be, quote, utterly without redeeming social value. This appeal was rejected in multiple different courts, until he was finally granted a hearing in the Supreme Court. During the trial, the court acknowledged the dangers of regulating expression, and said that state statutes designed to regulate obscene materials must be carefully limited. In doing this, they gave birth to what is commonly referred to as the Miller test. The Miller test is what is currently being used by the US courts to determine whether a work is considered to be obscene. The test itself is composed of 3 prongs. The first prong is used to determine whether the work taken as a whole appeals to the lascivious interest, based off of community standards. The second prong seeks to determine whether the work depicts or describes sexual conduct or excretory functions in a patently offensive way, which is also based off of community standards. And the final prong determines whether the work, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. When combined, these 3 prongs have been used to put a number of pseudo-pedophiles behind bars for varying durations. Luckily, for everyone, this test requires the criteria for all 3 prongs to be met in order for a work to be considered obscene. If not for that stipulation, any number of legitimate works could result in some pretty serious convictions, not to mention censorship. Even still, there are those who take issue with the implementation of the Miller test. Oftentimes, they're concerned about its potential to outlaw freedom of speech and expression. Though, post-implementation, it has been found that the Miller test makes it fairly difficult to outlaw any form of expression. In fact, usually, the test allows for many works labeled as pornographic to be successfully argued to have some form of literary or artistic value. But, if you partake in the loli lifestyle, don't start jumping for joy just yet. It's important to note that works involving sexual depictions of underage persons have a tendency to fail the Miller test. One of the more glaring issues with the Miller test may, however, bring hope to some of you pruriently deviant individuals. The prongs that are reliant on community standards have the potential to result in different outcomes based on the community or state that the charges are brought forth in. Meaning that if you get caught doing front strokes at the virtually simulated kiddie pool, you might not necessarily end up neck deep in prison, brandished as a child sex offender. It's also worth mentioning that you may be safe under the law if you can prove that you didn't receive the depictions through a common carrier, such as the mail or the internet, and that the depictions were not transported across state lines. So, essentially, if you drew them yourself and kept them to yourself and you didn't leave your state with them, you're probably going to be safe. But if you do happen to get caught and you end up in court, you should know that sentencing isn't exactly something you might consider to be light. Plea bargains usually result in jail time with several years of supervised release and parole. And if the case happens to go to trial and you're found guilty, then you're going to be looking at well over a decade in a state penitentiary with some of the most violent and dangerous convicted criminals. This is exactly what happened to one Dwight Horley, a Virginia native who was convicted for receiving obscene Japanese animated cartoons that graphically depicted prepubescent female children being forced to engage in different forms of intercourse with adults. His conviction resulted in 20 years of imprisonment. Despite the possibility of harrowing, lengthy sentences and looming six-figure plus fines, some people are still somewhat vocal about their participation in this illicit art form. One such person is a YouTuber with almost 350,000 subscribers who goes by the name of Digibro.
Hey everypony, I'm Digibrony, and I do a series on YouTube where I thoroughly analyze My Little Pony.
Digibro, a former My Little Pony reviewer turned anime analyst, is somewhat of a troubled man whom I've made a few videos about in the past. On one occasion, in my video entitled The Digibro Expose, Why the PCP Fails at Business, I briefly poked fun at what appears to be Digi's attraction to young girls. Now, as much as I'd like to say that this joke has no basis in reality, as some have claimed, that would simply be untrue. In the not-so-distant past, Digibro has released many videos publicly discussing anime revolving around young, quote, cute girls having intimate and sexual relationships with one another and his fondness towards them. In addition to that, Digibro was recently featured in a video on the Procrastinator's YouTube channel, publicly admitting to having drawn sexually explicit depictions of, well, I'll let him explain that for himself.
If you're trying to draw shit, and I mean 2 hours is enough time, you're going to complete multiple drawings. So you're drawing multiple things a day, every day. You're trying out different poses. And I drew some pretty halfway decent porn I can't post anywhere because it's too fucking extreme. It's like a lolly getting, like, I've got like a gigantic drill just like pulverizing some lolly's cunt, and it's great.
Jesus Christ.
I've got a bunch of shit like that.
All right, we're going down.
I don't know where to put.
Now.
I don't know where to post it.
But for Digibro, simply drawing this form of extreme pornography to enjoy himself isn't where the buck stops. In fact, he's reveled in creating and sharing his pedophilia-ridden light novel entitled Tales from the End of the World, Scarlet City, with his close fans, in which the main character, a 13-year-old girl, has intimate and sexual experiences with older men and younger girls.
Part 1 in particular is just like, what the fuck inspired me to write such a creepy feeling, like borderline pedophilic story about these like little girls talking about their sex lives. And I think what really caused it is this combination of my influences, because this would have been probably around the time that I'd read through like Hodo Musco, and I was like really interested in the idea of exploring like child psychology and child sexuality and stuff. The problem is that I also want this to be like a Toaru Majutsu no Index kind of thing, where there's like a bunch of goofy lolly fan service in it. And those two elements combined make the whole thing just like really creepy. Like something about that bath scene with Dark Holy and So Anryo is like, that could have been adorable if this was more of like a lighthearted, fun story. But because it's like this story that's also trying to make like meaningful commentary about sex, it just comes off as like, yeah, little girls fucking, you know? Whoa! It's pretty bad. It made me uncomfortable to read it myself. It just should have been done differently, especially with Dark. And I mean, Dark Holy herself, like, it makes sense for her to be such a crass character because she is like someone who like spent her whole childhood getting like raped and stuff, and like her mindset is that she just doesn't give a fuck about it and she's open about everything. But it's still creepy, and like, why did they both have to be that age? That's the worst part, is that they're both like these young girls discussing their sex life.
No face would have been a better romantic interest.
What about Sosuke for Ponyo? He's great. Sosuke's perfect.
Boring. I mean, you liked him, but you know, I'm not a pedophile, so.
I'm not either for boys.
Don't forget to brush your teeth, you disgusting monster.
On the other side of things, you have people like Douchebag Chocolate, a once active popular anime YouTuber who goes by the name of Demolition D, or Demo for short. In 2013, Demo passionately condemned the mob of loli-loving forum dwellers who attempt to put as much distance between Lolicon and pedophilia as possible by countering some of their arguments.
But Demo, they're not real. I have no interest in filthy 3D children. Behold the last line of defense. This is likely what you'll hear more than anything else when discussing this topic, and it is quite easily the most disturbing counter-argument in the arsenal. If you think this way, you seem to be under the misconception that we're all rallying for the rights of fictional characters, when in reality, it is the idea that is most volatile, not just the actions. You act as though since there's no action, i.e. you not raping little girls in the real world, then everything is fine, when no one's actually worried about that most of the time, to be honest. It's the idea that's sickening, and the passing on of that idea as a viable notion that disturbs. We don't want to have sexual intercourse and in turn potentially harm an underdeveloped elementary school girl or boy's body and mind. That would be wrong. What we want to do is do that to fictional ones. Oh, well, forgive me and my baseless accusations. Please go on and continue being a non-threatening member of society, you and your desire to be a fictional kitty fiddler, you righteous and just individual.
His point about passing on and normalizing the sexualization of fictional children is one that I find to be incredibly interesting and worth delving into. For instance, if you knew for a fact that Lolicon leads to the normalization of pedophilia, which in turn leads to an increase in child abuse, would the argument of, it's just fictional kids, real kids aren't getting hurt, still be applicable? I think that this is a valuable question worth considering, but there would need to be conclusive evidence proving that Lolicon does lead to child abuse. Surely enough, research has been done on the topic. In a 1987 report, the USA National Institute of Justice found a disturbing correlation between the traders of child pornography and acts of child molestation. A longitudinal study of 341 child molesters in America, done in 2008, found that the use of pornography correlated significantly with the rate of sexually reoffending. On top of that, a study conducted by psychologists at the American Federal Bureau of Prisons concluded that many internet child pornography offenders may be undetected child molesters, though they also cautioned that offenders who volunteer for treatment may differ in their behavior from those who do not seek treatment. This evidence appears to be quite damning, but let's take a look at the other side of the debate. Unlike the previous studies, there have been studies out of Japan, Denmark, and the Czech Republic that find the exact opposite is true, citing that the incidence of child sex abuse has fallen considerably since child pornography had become readily accessible. These studies have found that potential offenders use child pornography as a substitute for sex crimes against children. Unfortunately, with results so mixed, consensus as to whether Lolicon leads to child abuse is still inconclusive. Despite this, many people on both sides of the debate regularly use arguments that are at the very least unsubstantiated. One such argument is that people who indulge in Lolicon rarely, if ever, venture towards real child pornography, as they prefer the aesthetics of drawn or animated characters. Not only is this claim unsubstantiated, but there is evidence that directly contradicts this claim. In several cases involving Lolicon, simulated child pornography charges were dropped to pursue charges involving actual child pornography because of an overwhelming amount of evidence that was present, as can clearly be seen in cases like that of Maine v. Audette in 2011 and Idaho v. Kutzner in 2010. Because of the number of these cases that exist, there's obviously at least some overlap between the two audiences, just as there is some correlation between the glorification of violence in the media and an increase in school shootings. The key word in both these instances being some and not all. I think it's fair to say that the majority of people who experience violent media don't go on to commit violent crimes. Likewise, I don't think that the majority of people who engage in Lolicon go on to molest children. Because of this, I don't think it's fair to take away the freedoms of others simply because a relative few people act like savages that can't handle the freedom they're allotted. Though, if you are someone whose interests involve watching little girls have sex, fictional or otherwise, you're still a fucking weirdo and you should probably be on a watch list. But what do you think? Should Lolicon be legal? If you like this video and you want more content with me in it, then consider patroning me on Patreon, where you'll get access to all sorts of different video content, including memes, updates, rants, reviews, and more. Prices have recently been slashed, and all the money earned currently goes towards upgrading and maintaining the equipment that I use to create videos. But if you don't have any money and you still want to contribute, consider checking me out on Steemit and DTube, where upvotes and comments earn both of us money. It's free to use and a great way to get some first-hand experience using cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. Additionally, you can follow me on Twitter and Discord to stay up to date on everything that has to do with me and my content.
Subscribe to Mr. White Kick.